The first time my husband suggested I might not be thinking clearly anymore, we were sitting under the soft, yellow lights of a courtroom. I remember the hum of the air conditioner more than anything else. It was steady and different. The kind of sound that reminds you the world keeps moving even when your own has cracked open. She hasn't been herself for a few years now, he said calmly, hands folded in front of him. I'm concerned about her cognitive stability. Concerned. After 52 years of marriage, that was the word he chose. I did not cry. I did not gasp. I simply looked at the side of his face, the same profile I had once watched while he slept. The same mouth that had whispered to me in hospital rooms and delivery wards and on quiet Sunday mornings. I had known this hearing would be painful. I had not known he would try to erase me. The judge glanced toward me with professional neutrality. My attorney touched my elbow gently, as if I might topple over. I did not. At 78, you learn how to stand very still. He went on to describe small things, moments taken out of context, a misplaced set of keys, a forgotten appointment, the time I repeated a story at Thanksgiving. He did not mention that he had repeated the same story about his golf tournament 3 times that evening. He did not mention that I had managed our home, our schedules, our children's lives for decades without so much as a bounce check. He did not mention that the house we were arguing about had once been a place where I knew every creak in the floorboards better than my own pulse. The house, it had belonged to his parents before it belonged to us. A stately New England colonial with dark wood floors and wide windows that caught the autumn light like stained glass. When we moved in as newlyweds, I remember thinking the rooms were too large for just the 2 of us. We filled them, 3 children, countless Christmas mornings, birthday candles flickering against antique wallpaper, the smell of cinnamon and roasting turkey embedded in the beams. I learned the rhythm of that house the way some women learn sheet music, the soft groan of the 3rd stair from the bottom, the way wind moved through the maple tree outside our bedroom window. It had never technically been mine. It had been inherited by him after his parents passed. I knew that. I had always known that. But I had believed, perhaps foolishly, that a life built inside walls grants you a kind of invisible ownership. 10 years ago, without much discussion, he placed the property into an irrevocable trust. He explained it as estate planning, protection, efficiency. I signed what he put in front of me. I trusted him. In court that morning, I realized the trust had not been about efficiency. It had been about insulation. He was not stealing the house. He was making sure I could never touch it. My daughter Emily sat in the 2nd row behind us. I could feel her eyes on the back of my neck. I wondered what she was thinking, whether she believed him. That thought hurt more than anything he had said. When the judge ordered an independent cognitive evaluation, my husband nodded as though relieved. As though this was a kindness. I turned toward him for the first time since he began speaking. I am right here, I said quietly. He did not meet my eyes. In that moment, I understood something that took me months to admit to myself. This was not about money. It was about narrative. If he could convince them I was fading, then he could step cleanly into the role of protector. The reasonable one, the stable one, and I would become a footnote in my own life. I folded my hands in my lap and sat up straighter. If I had learned anything in 78 years, it was this: I was not done being heard. When we left the courthouse that afternoon, the sky was the pale gray of early November, the kind that flattens everything beneath it. The maple trees along the parking lot had already surrendered most of their leaves. What remained clung stubbornly to the branches, trembling in the wind. I remember thinking they looked like hands that didn't want to let go. Emily walked beside me in silence. She had always moved quickly, even as a child, a forward-leaning stride, impatient with hesitation. That day she slowed her pace to match mine. It was such a small adjustment, but I noticed. "Mom," she said finally, her voice careful, "the evaluation, it's routine. It doesn't mean anything." Routine. There are words that sound harmless until they are applied to you. I nodded, pretending I agreed. But inside, something was unraveling. Not because I feared the test. I knew my mind was steady. I read every morning. I did the crossword in ink. I could still recite the birthdays of every grandchild, and the exact measurements of the dining room curtains I had sewn 30 years ago. No, what unsettled me was the ease with which he had spoken, as though he had rehearsed it. That evening, I returned to the house, I suppose I should say his house, though my tongue still resisted the distinction. The front door opened with the same familiar weight. The scent of old wood and lemon polish greeted me like an old friend who didn't yet know we were parting ways. I ran my fingers along the banister as I climbed the stairs. The third step still groaned softly. I almost smiled. How many times had I carried babies up these stairs? Laundry baskets? Christmas gifts hidden under blankets so small eyes wouldn't peek. I paused outside what used to be our bedroom. He had moved into the guest room months ago, claiming he slept better there. At the time, I accepted it. Aging bodies require adjustments, I told myself. We had both earned our separate pillows. Now I wondered when the distance had truly begun. 10 years earlier, when he first mentioned the trust, we were sitting at this very kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, catching dust in the air. It's just smart planning, he had said, sliding the documents toward me. Keeps things simple for the kids. I skimmed the pages without fully understanding them. Words like irrevocable and beneficiary seemed abstract, distant. He explained that the house inherited from his parents would be protected, streamlined, shielded from future complications. I signed, not because I was incapable of reading legal language, but because I believed we were still we. Over time, other changes followed. Subtle at first. He insisted on handling the online banking. You don't need the stress, he said. When I asked about certain withdrawals, he waved them off as investment adjustments. Passwords changed. Mail began arriving addressed only to him. If I questioned anything, he would tilt his head slightly, that familiar half-smile appearing. You worry too much. It is astonishing how easily concern can be reframed as fragility. I began to doubt small things. Had I misunderstood? Had I forgotten? I told myself that marriage, especially a long one, requires flexibility. We bend so often we forget the shape we once held. The night before the divorce announcement, he barely spoke during dinner. The clink of silverware against porcelain echoed too loudly in the dining room. Emily noticed. I sighed in the way her eyes flicked between us. After the dishes were clear, he remained seated at the table. I think we need to discuss the future, he said. The future, such a gentle word for demolition. Standing there now in the quiet hallway, I pressed my palm against the bedroom door and let myself feel it fully, the truth I had resisted for years. He had not suddenly decided I was unstable. He wasn't trying to take my home. He was trying to redefine me as someone who had never truly belonged in it at all. The official notice arrived on a Tuesday, not by courier, not by some dramatic knock at the door. Just ordinary mail, folded among catalogs and a charity appeal from the hospital auxiliary. I recognized the return address before I opened it, a law firm in Hartford. My fingers did not tremble. That surprised me. I had always imagined that if my life were to split in two, my body would protest. Instead, I felt eerily calm. Irretrievable breakdown of marriage. Such a sterile phrase for the dismantling of half a century. He was in his study when I walked in, holding the envelope. The door was half closed, as it often had been these past few years. He looked up from his laptop, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, not quite. Anticipation, perhaps. As though he had been waiting for this moment to become official. I suppose you've seen it, I said. He removed his glasses slowly. Yes. No apology. No explanation. I thought we were discussing the future, I continued, hearing how small my voice sounded in the high-ceilinged room. We are, he replied. This is part of it. The study smelled faintly of leather and old paper. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes he had collected over decades, biographies, business texts, thick legal guides he rarely read but liked to display. It had always been his domain. I had respected that. Every marriage has its territories. But as I stood there, I realized I had gradually surrendered more ground than I remembered. When did you decide? I asked. He leaned back in his chair. It's not sudden, you know that. I searched my memory for some dramatic argument, some explosive fight that might justify the word breakdown. There had been none, just a slow cooling, a quiet rearranging of responsibilities. His increasing insistence on handling the important things. You think I don't see what's happening? He went on. You forget things. You repeat yourself. I can't build the next chapter worrying about whether you're capable of keeping up. The next chapter. At 78. I felt something harden inside me, then not anger exactly, but clarity. You're divorcing me because I age, I said. No, he replied quickly. I'm divorcing you because I can't carry both of us. Carry. For decades I had carried children, groceries, schedules, grief when his father died, anxiety when his business faltered in the early 90s. I had carried the invisible labor that allowed him to move freely through the world. Now I was weight. That evening, Emily called. He must have told the children before filing. I would later learn he had framed it as a necessary transition. Mom, she began cautiously. Dad says you've been struggling, that you've seemed overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. I closed my eyes and pictured her as a little girl sitting cross-legged on the kitchen floor, braiding the fringe of a rug while I prepared dinner. Do I sound overwhelmed to you? I asked gently. There was a pause. No, she admitted. But he sounded worried. Of course he did. He had always been persuasive when he chose to be. Calm, rational, measured. I'm going to have an evaluation, I told her. An independent one. Why? She asked. Because your father thinks I'm not capable. Silence again. This one heavier. Mom, if it proves he's wrong, it will, I said, more firmly than I felt. After we hung up, I walked through the house room by room. The dining room still held the long oak table we had bought at an estate sale. The living room windows reflected my figure back at me in the fading light, smaller than I remember, but steady. In the kitchen, I rested my hands on the counter where I had signed the trust documents a decade earlier. I replayed that afternoon in my mind, the way he had described it as protection, the way I had nodded, believing we were safeguarding something together. But the trust had not been built to protect us. It had been built to protect him from me. And now, as I stood alone in the house that had shaped my adult life, I began to understand something deeper than betrayal. He wasn't trying to take my home. He was trying to redefine me as someone who had never truly belonged in it at all. The evaluation was scheduled for the following Monday. I chose my clothes with unusual care that morning. A navy sweater I had worn to Amelia's college graduation. Pearl earrings my mother had given me when I turned 40. Not because I believed fabric could influence cognition, but because presentation matters when someone is quietly trying to reduce you to a diagnosis. The clinic was modern and overly bright. Glass walls, neutral carpeting, the kind of place designed to feel efficient rather than warm. Emily insisted on driving me. I just want to be there, she said. There was something tentative in her tone, as though she were still deciding which version of events to believe. In the waiting room, I watched a television mounted in the corner broadcasting muted daytime news. A ticker scrolled beneath a smiling anchor's face. Markets rising, storm approaching the Midwest. Ordinary crises. When my name was called, I stood without hesitation. The neurologist was younger than I expected. Polite, direct. He explained the process: memory recall, pattern recognition, language tests, executive function exercises. Routine, he assured me. Routine. For 2 hours, I answered questions. I repeated strings of numbers forward and backward. I identified abstract similarities between objects. I copied geometric shapes with steady hands. I recited the months of the year in reverse. At one point he asked, "Why do you believe your husband requested this evaluation?" I considered the safest answer. "Because he thinks I'm declining," I said carefully. "And do you believe you are?" I met his eyes. "No, there is something liberating about speaking plainly to a stranger." When I emerged, Emily stood up quickly. Her fingers twisted the strap of her purse, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Well?" she asked. "They'll send the formal report to the court," I said. But he didn't seem concerned. That afternoon, as we drove back toward the house, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. It struck the windshield at an angle that forced Emily to lower the visor. "Dad says he's just planning responsibly," she said quietly. "That the trust protects all of us." "Does it?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said without it, if something happened to you, medical costs, long-term care, the house could be exposed." I turned my face toward the window. Rows of bare trees blurred past us. "And did he tell you when he created it?" I asked. 10 years ago. "Yes." She frowned slightly. "You knew." I knew he was creating something. I did not understand I was being excluded from the structure. That was the part that had begun to settle heavily inside me. Not the legality, not even the divorce itself. The exclusion. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had: symmetrical, dignified, immovable. The maple tree in the front yard stood stripped of most of its leaves, its branches skeletal against the pale sky. Inside, he was seated at the kitchen table reviewing paperwork. For a moment, the scene felt almost domestic. Familiar. "How did it go?" he asked without looking up. "Thorough," I replied. He nodded. "Good. It's better this way. Clean, clean, as though doubt could be sanitized." The official report arrived 3 days later, cognitively intact. No evidence of impairment. Fully capable of managing personal and financial affairs. The words were clinical, but they vibrated in my hands. He read the copy his attorney forwarded to him in silence. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well," he said finally, "that's one less complication." Complication. I watched him carefully then, studying the man I had once believed incapable of cruelty. There was no apology in his posture, no embarrassment, only recalibration. The strategy had shifted. That evening, he requested that all future communication about the divorce go through counsel. "I think it's best," he said. Less emotional, as if emotion were the flaw in the system. After he retreated to his study, I remained at the table, the evaluation report resting in front of me. I traced the edge of the paper slowly. He had tried to question my mind. The court had restored it, but something inside our family had already been set in motion, something the evaluation could not measure. Emily called later that night. "I read the report," she said. "And? I'm sorry I doubted you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I closed my eyes. "I know you did," I replied gently. For the first time since the courtroom, I felt the faintest shift in the balance of power. Not financial, moral, and I suspected he felt it too. The dinner was his idea. "Before this becomes uglier than it needs to be," he had said through his attorney, "we should speak as a family." As a family. The phrase almost made me laugh. Emily insisted we hold it at the house. My sons David and Mark arrived together, their wives following a step behind, carrying bottles of wine no one intended to drink. The air in the dining room felt tight, as if the walls themselves were bracing. I had set the table out of habit. White linen, the good china, silver polished until it reflected the chandelier above. I do not know why I bothered. Perhaps I needed to remind myself that I still knew how to host my own children. He entered last, composed as ever. He had always been comfortable at the head of a table. For a few minutes, we performed normalcy. Comments about traffic, about the weather turning colder, about the grandchildren's school projects. The clink of forks against porcelain sounded unnaturally loud. Finally, he cleared his throat. As you know, he began evenly, your mother and I are proceeding with the divorce. Silence fell like a curtain. David shifted in his chair. Mark stared at his plate. Emily watched him, without blinking. I want you to understand, he continued, this isn't impulsive. It's responsible planning. The trust structure protects the property long term. It ensures stability. For whom? Emily asked quietly. For all of you, he replied. I felt every pair of eyes move toward me, as though I were the unpredictable variable in an otherwise rational equation. I'm not contesting the trust, I said calmly. It was legally established. David exhaled audibly, as if relieved. Then what's the fight about? The question stung more than I expected. It's not a fight, I answered. It's a divorce. Mark finally spoke. Dad said the evaluation cleared everything up. It did, Emily cut in before I could respond. Mom's completely fine. Her tone was sharper than usual. Defensive. My husband nodded. And that's good. Truly. But compatibility changes. Needs change. At 78, apparently. David glanced between us. So what happens now? Your mother will receive support, he said, as though discussing a business settlement. Shall be comfortable. Comfortable. A word that implies dependency. And the house? Mark asked. It remains in the trust, he replied. As intended. I looked at my sons, grown men with gray beginning to touch their temples, and saw confusion more than malice. They were trying to calculate impact. Inheritance. Stability. Disruption. Amelia's voice broke through the quiet. Dad, she said slowly. Did you ever tell us that you moved the house into the trust while Mom was recovering from surgery? The room shifted. His expression hardened, just slightly. That was 10 years ago. It was efficient timing. Efficient? She repeated. I remembered that surgery vividly. A hip replacement. Weeks of physical therapy. I had been groggy on medication when he brought the documents to my bedside table. You said it was paperwork we'd already discussed, I said evenly. And it was, he replied. But it hadn't been. Not fully. Mark leaned back, rubbing his forehead. This feels like it's about more than logistics. It is, I said quietly. My husband's gaze flicked toward me, warning in its steadiness. Emily pushed her chair back slightly. Dad, you tried to convince the court she wasn't competent. That was precautionary, he snapped, the first crack in his composure. No, she said firmly. That was strategic. The word hung between them. David looked uncomfortable. Can we not turn this into a trial? It already was. My husband inhaled slowly. Emily, you need to understand something. If you choose to escalate this, if you testify or undermine the estate plan, there will be consequences. The room went still. What kind of consequences? She asked. He held her gaze. The trust beneficiaries can be adjusted. There it was. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just a statement of leverage. My sons exchanged a glance. Calculation again. Emily did not look away. So if I defend Mom, she said softly, I'm out. He did not deny it. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not because I knew what she would choose, but because the truth had finally surfaced without disguise. This was never about my capacity. It was about control. And now, for the first time, it was not just my integrity being tested. It was hers. After the dinner, the house felt different. Not emptier, it had been empty for months in ways no one could see but exposed. As if the walls themselves had heard the ultimatum, and were waiting for its consequences to unfold. Emily called me the next morning. I didn't sleep, she admitted. Neither did I replied. There was a pause. I could hear her moving around her kitchen, the soft thud of a cabinet closing. He meant it, she said finally. About the trust. Yes, I answered. I've looked at the documents. Of course she had. Emily had always been methodical once doubt entered her mind. The trust is airtight, she continued. It's irrevocable. The beneficiaries are named, but he has limited powers to modify distribution percentages under certain conditions. I closed my eyes. Conditions like disloyalty? He wouldn't phrase it that way, she said. But yes, there it was, the cost of conscience, quantified. Emily, I said gently, I never asked you to fight this. I know, she replied quickly. That's what makes it worse. That afternoon, I met with my attorney alone, a quiet woman in her early 60s who listened more than she spoke. She had reviewed the trust, the evaluation, the filing. You have a strong position regarding spousal support, she said. 52 years of marriage carries weight. And the house? I asked. It was inherited property, placed into a valid, irrevocable trust long before the divorce filing. There's no evidence of fraud. So it was as I had suspected. This would not be a courtroom miracle. There would be no dramatic reversal, no last-minute discovery that restored ownership. Legally, he had been careful. Then what are we fighting? I asked. Not fighting, she corrected softly. Clarifying. The difference between losing property and losing dignity. In the days that followed, something shifted in him. The quiet civility he had maintained gave way to precision. Conversations ceased entirely. Emails replaced speech. He began cataloging household items, antiques, artwork, furniture, as though inventorying a departing tenant's belongings. One evening, as I stood in the hallway outside the study, I heard him on the phone. Yes, he said evenly, if she escalates, adjustments can be made. He did not raise his voice. He never did. I stepped away before he saw me. The following week, depositions were scheduled. Not dramatic courtroom confrontations, just formal statements recorded under oath. Amila's name appeared on the witness list. She came to see me the night before. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had signed the trust papers a decade earlier. A single lamp cast a warm circle of light between us. I keep thinking about when you taught me to ride a bike, she said unexpectedly. I smiled faintly. You refused to let go of the handlebars. You ran behind me anyway. Yes. And when I finally pedaled on my own, you let go without telling me. I nodded. I remembered the exact afternoon, the scrape on her knee, the triumphant grin. I trusted you, she said quietly, even when I didn't know you were holding me up. My throat tightened. Dad says he's protecting the legacy, she continued. But what is a legacy if it requires silence? I reached across the table and took her hand. I will survive without that house, I told her. I have survived far more. She studied my face, searching for hesitation. But I won't survive, I added gently, being erased. The word lingered between us. She exhaled slowly. If I testify, he'll reduce my share, maybe cut me out entirely. Yes, I said. And if I don't, you will know. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, she straightened her shoulders, a gesture so familiar it felt like watching her at 16 before a debate competition. I won't let him rewrite you, she said. It was not dramatic, not loud, just certain. As she stood to leave, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, not even relief. Grief, because I knew that whatever happened next, a fracture would become permanent. And legacies, once split, do not easily mend. The deposition room was smaller than I expected. No grand courtroom, no gallery of observers, just a rectangular table, a court reporter with quick fingers, two attorneys, my husband, Emily, and me. Neutral carpet, neutral walls, neutral air. It struck me that some of life's most consequential moments unfold in spaces designed to feel insignificant. Emily arrived first. She wore a charcoal blazer and had pulled her hair back the way she used to before school presentations. When she saw me, she gave a small nod, not dramatic reassurance, just steadiness. My husband entered a few minutes later. He did not look at her. He did not look at me. The attorneys exchanged polite greetings. Legal procedure has a rhythm of its own, names for the record, reminders about oath, confirmation that testimony is being recorded. When it was Amila's turn, she raised her right hand. I swear, she said. Her voice did not waver. My husband's attorney began gently. Ms. Carter, prior to the divorce filing, did you observe any changes in your mother's cognitive functioning? A strategic question. Leading. Emily paused. At first, she said carefully, I thought maybe she seemed distracted. I felt the words land like a pebble dropped into water. The attorney leaned forward slightly. Distracted in what way? She repeated a story once at Thanksgiving, Emily said. She misplaced her phone once. And did that concern you? It did, she admitted. My husband's gaze shifted toward her, then just slightly, as if to say, see? The attorney pressed. So your father's request for evaluation was reasonable? Emily inhaled slowly. I believed it was at first. The air in the room tightened. But after the independent assessment, she continued, and after reviewing the trust documents and timeline, I no longer believe this was about cognitive concern. A faint muscle moved in my husband's jaw. Then what do you believe it was about? The attorney asked. Amila's eyes flicked toward me for half a second, then returned forward. I believe my father wanted to establish a narrative that would make the divorce cleaner, less contested, less complicated. The court reporter's fingers moved quickly across the keys. The attorney shifted tactics. Are you aware that the property in question was inherited by your father and legally placed into an irrevocable trust? Yes, she said. And are you aware that this structure protects all named beneficiaries? Yes. So you acknowledge this was lawful? Lawful, Emily repeated. Yes. There it was, the distinction. The attorney leaned back. Then what exactly are you challenging? Emily did not hesitate. I'm not challenging legality, she said. I'm challenging implication. The word surprised even me. Implication? The attorney asked. My mother was presented publicly as unstable, she continued evenly. That implication damages her reputation. The evaluation proved she is fully competent. Silence. My husband's attorney tried again. But you understand your father has the right to structure his estate. Yes, Emily said. And my mother has the right not to be diminished in order to make that easier. It was not an accusation. Not a raised voice. Just clarity. When the deposition ended, no one clapped. No one reacted. Papers were gathered. Chairs slid quietly against the floor. My husband stood first. You've made your position clear, he said to Emily, his tone cool but controlled. I have, she replied. And you understand consequences follow choices. She met his eyes fully now. Yes. He nodded once, a small, formal gesture, then left the room. I remained seated for a moment longer, absorbing what had just occurred. There had been no dramatic revelation. No legal reversal. The trust remained intact. The divorce would proceed. But something irreversible had shifted. In choosing to speak plainly, Emily had altered the center of gravity. As we walked out together, she slipped her hand into mine, not as a child seeking protection, but as a woman standing beside another. I didn't attack him, she said quietly. I know. I just told the truth. Yes, I said. Outside, the afternoon light was sharp and clean. For weeks, I had feared losing the house. In that moment, I understood the deeper risk had never been brick and mortar. It had been whether silence would become the price of belonging. And my daughter had just decided it would not. The final hearing was mercifully brief. By then, the arguments had been distilled into documents, affidavits, structured exchanges between attorneys who spoke in careful tones and measured phrases. There were no surprises left, only confirmation. The judge reviewed the findings once more. The independent cognitive evaluation. The trust documentation. The duration of the marriage. My lack of independent retirement assets after decades devoted primarily to home and family. Spousal support is appropriate given the length of the marriage, the judge concluded evenly. The property held within the irrevocable trust remains outside the marital estate. Outside. Such a simple word for something that had contained my entire adult life. I felt no dramatic collapse. No tears streaming down my face. Just a quiet awareness that a chapter had closed exactly as the law permitted. My husband nodded slightly when the ruling was finalized. Efficient. Contained. He did not look at me. When we stepped out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. David and Mark stood near the elevator. They both hugged me awkwardly, briefly, as if unsure of protocol in the aftermath of legal resolution. It's going to be okay, Mom, David said. I know, I replied. And I meant it. Emily remained beside me. She had not spoken much during the hearing. She did not need to. In the weeks that followed, the practical dismantling began. Boxes appeared. Closets emptied. I sorted through drawers filled with decades of small accumulations: birthday cards, report cards, recipe clippings, faded photographs. It was astonishing how much of a life could fit into cardboard. He stayed mostly in his study while I packed. We moved through the house like polite strangers, sharing a waiting room. One afternoon, I stood alone in the living room and let myself really see it. The wide windows, the fireplace mantel where Christmas stockings had once hung unevenly, the faint indentation in the hardwood where the piano had sat for years before we sold it. I ran my hand along the wall near the staircase, where faint pencil marks still recorded the children's heights at different ages. We had never painted over them. I did not cry. Instead, I took a photograph. Not for nostalgia. For proof. On my final morning in the house, I woke before dawn. The air felt colder without the comfort of permanence. I walked room to room one last time, not as an owner, not even as a spouse, but as a witness. In the kitchen, I placed my palm on the counter where I had once signed the trust documents. I no longer felt anger about that moment. Only clarity. He had built a legal structure to secure assets. I had built a family. As I carried my final suitcase to the door, he stood in the foyer. I hope this arrangement provides you stability, he said. Arrangement. I studied his face, older now, though only months had passed. Determined. Convinced of his righteousness. It will, I answered calmly. He hesitated as if considering something more. Then he simply stepped aside. Outside, Emily waited beside her car. As we drove away, I did not turn around immediately. I focused instead on the road ahead, the curve of the street, the winter bare trees lining the sidewalk. Finally, at the corner, I glanced back. The house stood unchanged, solid, impressive. And suddenly, I understood something that had eluded me for months. He had kept the structure, but he had lost the audience. The grandchildren had already begun spending weekends at Amelia's home. David and Mark, though quieter in their stance, had not withdrawn from me. The narrative he had attempted to craft, the fragile wife, the necessary separation, had not taken root. Legally, he had won what he sought. Emotionally, the outcome was less precise. As Emily reached across the console and squeezed my hand, I felt something settle inside me. Loss is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the absence of illusion. And for the first time since the courtroom, I felt strangely unburdened. The house was no longer mine. But neither was the silence. Emily insisted I take the guest room at her house, though it was the smallest bedroom on the second floor. It gets the best morning light, she said, opening the curtains the first day I moved in. She was right. At sunrise, pale gold filtered through the thin cotton drapes and spilled across the quilt at the foot of the bed. The house smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent, different from the old wood and lemon polish I had grown accustomed to, but not unpleasant. Different did not mean lesser. The first few weeks were disorienting. I found myself waking in the night, unsure of where the bathroom was. I reached for light switches that weren't there. I opened kitchen drawers expecting wooden spoons and found measuring cups instead. It is astonishing how deeply muscle memory ties itself to place. Emily tried not to hover, but I could see the effort in her restraint. You don't have to check on me every hour, I told her gently one afternoon when I caught her lingering in the doorway. I'm not checking, she said quickly. I just wanted to see if you needed anything. I need time, I replied. She nodded. Time became the quiet gift I had not expected. Without the large house to maintain, without the constant background tension of waiting for the next strategic move, my days slowed. I walked around Amila's neighborhood in the mornings. Smaller houses, fewer grand trees, children's bicycles left on lawns without ceremony. No one here knew the details of my divorce. I was simply a woman walking. One afternoon, I sat at the small desk in the guest room and began writing. Not a memoir, not a legal statement, just notes, fragments of memory. The way the maple tree outside our old bedroom window had sounded in a storm. The first Christmas in the inherited house, when the furnace failed and we laughed under layers of blankets. The night Emily broke her arm, and I stayed awake beside her hospital bed counting her breaths. I did not write about the trust. I wrote about the life that had existed long before it. Weeks passed. David called more often than I expected. Mark invited me to his son's basketball game. Neither spoke directly about the dinner ultimatum, but something in their tone had softened. And then, one Sunday afternoon, Emily sat across from me at her kitchen table with a folder in her hands. I received a letter from Dad's attorney, she said. I felt no immediate fear. And? I asked. He amended the distribution percentages. There it was. He reduced my share, she continued. Not eliminated, just adjusted. I studied her face carefully. Are you surprised? I asked. No. Are you angry? She considered that. A little, she admitted. But not about the money. Then what? That it had to be framed as punishment. Punishment. I reached for her hand. You chose integrity, I said softly. That is rarely rewarded immediately. She gave a faint smile. I know. Later that evening, as I sat alone in the guest room, I allowed myself to imagine him in the large colonial house. The study lamp glowing late into the night. The quiet echo of rooms built for more people than one. He had secured the structure. Adjusted percentages. Maintained control. But control has limits. You cannot mandate affection. You cannot draft loyalty into a legal instrument. In the weeks that followed, the grandchildren began asking more questions. Why don't Grandma and Grandpa live together? Why did Grandpa say Grandma was confused? Children are remarkably perceptive when given space to observe. Emily did not coach them. She did not dramatize. She simply told them the truth in gentle language. Sometimes adults make decisions that change where people live. Grandma is fine. And that, more than any courtroom statement, restored something essential. One evening, as I tucked my youngest granddaughter into bed during a sleepover, she looked up at me and asked, "Are you staying with us forever?" I smiled. For a while, I said. She seemed satisfied with that. Back in the guest room, I opened my notebook again. I began writing not about loss, but about legacy. Not the kind measured in square footage or account balances. The kind measured in who still reaches for your hand when the story shifts. For the first time since leaving the house, I did not feel displaced. I felt redefined. A year passes more quietly at 79, and it did at 29. There are fewer dramatic beginnings, more subtle recalibrations. By the time the first anniversary of the divorce approached, I had stopped counting days in relation to it. The date arrived almost unnoticed, just another square on the calendar. Emily suggested we plant something in the yard that morning. Not a memorial, she clarified quickly. Just something that grows. We chose a young maple from a local nursery. Smaller than the one that stood in front of the colonial house, but sturdy. Its roots wrapped tightly in burlap, waiting. As we dug into the soil together, I felt the unfamiliar weight of a shovel in my hands. I had not done much yard work in years. In the old house, landscaping had eventually become something we hired out, efficient, tidy, distant. This felt different, immediate. personal. You don't have to do all of it, Emily said when she noticed me catching my breath. I want to, I replied. We worked in quiet rhythm. Earth loosening, roots settling, soil pressed firmly back into place. When it was done, we stood side by side, studying the small tree. It will take time, she said. Yes, I answered. It should. Later that afternoon, David and Mark stopped by with their families. The children ran through the yard, circling the new tree as if it had always been there. At some point, someone mentioned that their grandfather had not been attending as many family gatherings lately. Busy, they said. Travel, commitments. No one elaborated. I did not ask. That evening, after the house had quieted and the dishes were put away, I sat alone in the guest room, though it no longer felt like a guest room. My books lined the shelf now. My framed photographs rested on the dresser. The quilt at the foot of the bed smelled faintly of lavender from the detergent I preferred. I opened the notebook I had been filling for months. Page after page of small recollections. Not accusations. Not grievances. Just memory, preserved in my own voice. I thought about the courtroom, the hum of the air conditioner, the careful phrasing of concern. I thought about the trust documents, the dinner ultimatum, the deposition room. And then I thought about this house. The morning light. The sound of my granddaughter's laughter drifting up the stairs. The feel of soil beneath my fingernails from planting something new. He had kept the inherited house. Legally, that was never in doubt. He had kept the trust intact. Adjusted percentages. Secured structure. Preserved what he believed was legacy. But legacy is not a building. It is not even a document. It is what remains when narrative fails. I had feared being erased. Instead, I had been clarified. My children did not see me as fragile. My grandchildren did not see me as confused. The court had confirmed my competence, but more importantly, my family had witnessed my steadiness. There is a peculiar freedom in losing what you once believed defined you. Without the large rooms, I found my voice louder. Without the title of wife, I found my identity less negotiated. I closed the notebook and placed it carefully in the drawer. Not hidden, just resting. Outside the window, the young maple stood thin but upright against the fading light. It would take years before its branches stretched wide enough to cast meaningful shade. Years before it marked height on a wall, or rustled against second-story windows. That was all right. Growth, like dignity, does not rush. As I turned off the lamp and lay back against the pillow, I understood something with a certainty that required no legal validation. He had protected his assets. I had preserved my place. And in the quiet exchange between those two outcomes, I knew which would endure longer. If there is a lesson hidden inside all of this, it is not about divorce or trusts or even late-life reinvention. It is about voice. At 78, I learned that losing property is survivable. Losing reputation feels unbearable. And yet, even reputation can be restored not through shouting, not through revenge, but through steadiness. I also learned that legality and morality are not always the same thing. A structure can be airtight and still hollow. A decision can be lawful and still costly. But perhaps the most valuable lesson was this: legacy is not what you leave behind in documents. It is what your children defend when no one is forcing them to. My daughter could have chosen silence. It would have been easier, quieter, more profitable. Instead, she chose integrity. And in doing so, she reminded me that the years I spent raising my children were not invisible labor. They were investment not in property, but in character. If you are listening to this and walking through something similar, a fracture in a long marriage, a shift in family loyalty, a moment when someone tries to rewrite your story, I want you to remember this. You are not finished because someone redraws the map. You are not diminished because someone questions your capacity. And you are not erased simply because you lose a house. Sometimes the most powerful inheritance you pass down is the courage to stand calmly in the truth. Now I would like to ask you something. Have you ever faced a moment when your integrity cost you something tangible: money, status, comfort, but protected something deeper? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? If this story resonates with you, I invite you to share your experience. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in reflection. There is power in hearing one another. You can write to us at the email listed in the description below. Your story may help someone else who feels alone in a quiet battle. Because sometimes the house is lost, but the legacy, the one that truly matters, is still being built.